God has a reason for your life, but you don't. So actually, time, it's not different. You have to believe it because God's word tells us. But you don't have to understand. You're not laying awake thinking it, right? No. Yes. So I think that that's something that we believe, and we're not going to fully understand, but you'll probably understand bit by bit as you grow. But I'm 54, and I still don't understand it. Insufficient answer. So, I don't know. Do you believe what the Bible tells you? Yeah. Praise God. Whatever. And that's what I'm next.
Maybe I'll wait for people to get their gear free. Will you tell us about yourself and why you feel
Everyone's question was, yes. So, Karen and I do some things well that we weren't sure that we did well. Our ministry is so all-encompassing that you're just called upon to do so many things, whether you're good at it or not. It's just what a pastor is. The pastor serves a flock and can't know everything about that flock, and certainly can't tell the future because, Caroline, right? Time belongs to God, not to us. So you just have to bob and weave. And pastors don't always know what they're good at. They know what they take delight in, but here's what Karen and I are good at. We're really good at being around non-believers. We're really good about having non-believers in our house. We're really good about talking about Jesus and displaying Jesus in a way that sometimes includes words. I'm more talkative than Karen. But sometimes is just raw hospitality, kindness, cheerfulness, a smile. Karen and I actually really like being around non-believers. And the difficulty is that I have the kind of job in which I'm only around believers. You know what I mean. I'm a pastor. When I go to meetings, everyone in the room is a Christian. And that's not true for almost everyone in this room. When you go to meetings, you're not around Christians all the time. So what has happened with Karen and I is that we have discovered that this is a part of ministry that we enjoy. We have discovered that this is a kind of ministry that not everyone, not every pastor, does enjoy. We like Ashburn because we cut our teeth in ministry in the Pacific Northwest. And we are around non-believers a lot. And we really like that. And then we moved to Chattanooga, and the landscape shifted on us. Not positively or negatively, it just shifted. We discovered that we really like being around non-believers in our non-Sunday life, and we also like helping non-believers fall in love with the church. And that's super bumpy and confusing and uncertain, but we really like helping people embrace things that are new. Sunday morning worship, membership in a church, certainly becoming a Christian, but maybe becoming even a Calvinist. All of those moments along the way are really important for Karen and I. So that's the positive. There's negatives as well. For folks who've been believers for a really long time and know everything, we tend to move on. We tend to spend time with others. This church is exciting for us because it gives us an opportunity, we believe, to be around non-believers and to have the kind of place that we can bring non-believers, and to have the kind of place where we can actually talk about how to care for and love non-believers as we're learning from others, like you. We want to be in a place like that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, really quick, I don't like to start from scratch. Karen and I have never custom built a home, but it's just not our thing to start from scratch. My parents build homes all the time. They love it. I actually like the limitations that come from working with existing materials. And I'm not a church planter. I know that. I'm really optimistic about King's Cross. There's something here that can be built upon. That's exciting for me personally. But as a family, being with non-believers and walking them into something new, that's Karen and I, and in fact our whole family, we really love that. Okay. Am I out of frame?
Who's next? Who else has a question? Anyone? Here comes John Coyle coming to ask a question.
Oh, thank you, Pastor John. Would you mind walking us through your spiritual journey and tell us how you became a Christian?
Sure. John, you know they go up, right? Yeah. So Karen grew up in a Christian home. Karen's mother, who is now with the Lord, her mother was really significant to me. Karen's home life was just beautiful, but different from mine. I began living so I didn't grow up in the church, and I began living with my natural father as a freshman in high school. And my natural father would go to church occasionally, but he had never parented a teenager before. My parents were divorced when I was 6, and I just didn't know my dad. But I ended up in Dad's house, and Dad would go to church probably more than occasionally. But he was okay with my brother and I kind of walking slowly into the life of the church. I don't think I ever felt comfortable walking into the life of the church. I didn't become a believer until I was 19 or 20, and I was a college student. I was very happy not believing in Jesus. I was content with that. It felt good, sufficient. And a couple of things happened when I was 19. I was studying art. I was a fine art major at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. And I had been working on a portfolio for a school in Pasadena, an art school, and I didn't get in. It had been a year and a half trying to put together a portfolio, and I just was crestfallen. And Dad was never around. Dad was working in the interior of Alaska, so Dad would be gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time. It was just me in a house with a checkbook and signed checks, because I would pay bills while Dad was gone, and I just was despondent. I was depressed, unhappy, and a Baptist friend he would say this as well. He was interested in me getting to know Jesus. His name's Donovan. But, this is live streamed, isn't it? Maybe his name was Donovan. I just pulled it out of the air. But Donovan was unhappy with me not loving Jesus. Plus, he wanted to date my friend's older sister, a mixture of that. And Donovan spent a lot of time with me. And he was with me in my despondency, and lots of late nights in a big house. I mean, the house is empty. Dad's gone. And Donovan and I would sip tea and talk about Christianity, and he would let me vent and be angry. And I became a Christian. So that's how that happened. Which is, Caroline, I actually don't know how that happened, but that's how it happened. Where's Caroline?
When we were interviewing you, I really enjoyed you talking about your little theologians and how you like to involve them in the life of the church. Why don't you share with everyone some of your thoughts about involving children in the life of the church?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, welcome to Presbyterianism. Presbyterians believe that God brings us into a relationship with himself through promises that he makes. And Acts chapter 2 says that those promises are for us and for our children. Jesus loved children. Jesus did crazy things like not only approach children, but talk to children and hug children and lay his hands on them and bless children. The way Jesus talks about children was scandalous in first century Palestine. But he did that.
And we as Presbyterians, we believe all that, no doubt, but we tend to think about children being members of the covenant family by submitting to by being baptized, which they don't get to choose, right? Presbyterians baptize babies. But as they grow up, we catechize them so that they understand things about doctrine, and then we interview them so that they can come to the Lord's table, which is beautiful. I don't disagree with that at all. But we miss, it might be 5 or 6 or 7 or 12 or 14 years, whatever, when moms and dads allow their kids to be interviewed by elders to come to the Lord's table. Whatever that duration is, we can't miss that time. They're with us on Sunday for a reason. They're a part of our family. They're a part of mom and dad's family genetically, but we believe that the covenant has already begun to enfold them into the life of the church. So it's really good for ministers to make sure that children have a relationship with their pastor outside of an interview with elders. So pastors and elders, they just have to get to know children. Absolutely, one day they may interview those children. And children are certainly receiving instruction, and so their brains are getting bigger, right? These smart Presbyterian kids. But they have to know that this is their church too. And there's little things that we can do, like addressing them on a Sunday morning in the worship service, acknowledging that they're there. I have for 15 years, I've been calling children little theologians, and I teach the congregation to expect little theologians to be there and address them as such. So at the beginning of a sermon, I'll address the little theologians, and I make sure, I love art, and I love kids' art, so I make sure that if mom and dad let them draw whatever the highlights are of the sermon, that I collect them, and I have stacks and stacks of them. They just need to know. That's all. They just need to know before that interview that this is their church too. Okay.
Stephen, you have a question?
Sure. Let's see. So how do you see where King's Cross is situated in Ashburn as an opportunity? Like, what ways are we uniquely positioned to help the community or impact the community by being a church in this area, you think?
Yeah. So, that's a stumper, a lot like Caroline's question, really. There is a sense in which Karen and I, we would have to learn about Ashburn and our community, and to learn about the church as well, but differently. We need to live here, and we need to have neighbors, and we need to work on friendships. And how interesting it is that a lot of this we're taught by people who may actually not believe in Jesus. We're looking around and we're getting to know the needs of our neighbors, and that actually is what is the trigger for us. It compels us. This is a need, and we respond to that need. So part of it just happens like in situ, you know that expression, in its setting. I just don't do loud. I do, okay, close. So Stephen, there's something about being actually present for us to learn. But I will say a few things. Every ministry, every event in the life of King's Cross, it ought to be run through a filter of the experience of someone who doesn't know Jesus, or the experience of someone who may be on the fence about Jesus but still comes to all the events. So there has to be that filter applied to everything in the life of the church, including worship. You read 1 Corinthians 5, I believe that Paul there is teaching us, if nothing else, that non-believers were a part of that Corinthian worship service. So that needs to be a part of the filter for every ministry at King's Cross. I'm also arguing for, if Karen and I have to listen to our neighbors to discern their needs, I need to be teaching the congregation to do the same thing. Wherever you live, not everyone lives in Ashburn, but wherever you live, you need to be meeting your neighbors and spending time with non-believers that you too might discern their needs. So those things stand out. I am encouraged, though, about what I've already witnessed at King's Cross. There are some things that happen here that are already pretty organic. I went to a staff meeting yesterday, but I think I had a million other meetings yesterday. So say every meeting in my life happened yesterday. Let's just say that. And at the staff meeting, this church actually has a person who is a mercy coordinator. For a church as small and as young as King's Cross, That's exciting. King's Cross is already doing some things that I would like to not only be a part of, but to preach to and grow. So I'm sorry, Steve, that's the best I got. Yeah.
Maybe. Will you tell us about your doctoral work?
Yes. So I have, I entered 6 years ago a doctoral program because a man who is, am I right, Aaron? You're not looking at me. A man who was really important to me when I was called to ministry, who ministered at College Church in Wheaton, Illinois. He began to head up a doctoral program at Westminster for preachers. My study is how to teach people how to listen to sermons. You may not, I can convince you. It's actually really odd for a non-believer to sit down, not merely to sit through a worship service, but to actually listen to someone speak uninterrupted for 35, 45 minutes. That actually is a rather different thing, right? In the corporate world, short meetings are better than long meetings. Actually, in every solar system, short meetings are better than long meetings. But when is the last time a person will have sat and listened to someone speak uninterrupted? So maybe college, that happens, right? Stand-up comics do it. People pay for that. TED Talks, maybe. But a sermon is an interesting artifact. And I want to build a program such that when people come into a church, that's a class that we ask them to take. This is how to listen to Pastor John's sermons. This is what an introduction is. This is how main points are developed. This is what a conclusion is. You need to be listening for the raw ingredients of a sermon. Okay, so that actually really excites me, but that's what I'm preparing.
Who else has questions? Anyone? Amy, come on up. This is Evie and Peter.
All right, Evie or Peter?
Peter first.
All right,
We
Peter.
just wanted to know, how many cars do you have? And which one is your favorite?
That was well done. Great, thank you. Okay, so how many cars I own? Has anyone ever watched? Has anyone ever watched comedians in cars drinking coffee, whatever, that Netflix thing? And there was someone that asked Jerry Seinfeld. So it's a Jerry Seinfeld show, and he talks to comedians driving cars. And someone asked Jerry Seinfeld, "Hey, how many cars do you own?" And Jerry said, "I own the number of cars for which no one would ever say that's about right." That was his answer. I love that answer. So I have a lot of Matchbox cars. I have a lot of 1/18 scale cars. So I probably have 20 big ones, and I don't know, 40 small ones? Yeah, something like that. And my favorite car is a Ferrari, because Ferraris are the best cars. And there's a Ferrari that's designed by my favorite designer, and it's a Ferrari 250 GT SWB. So now you got something to Google, right? 250 GT SWB. That's my favorite.
Allison's going to ask a question.
Thank you. My question is, how do you, if you come, you and Karen, what does that look like for the first year? What does pastoring our church, granted I understand that probably it'll look a little different as time goes on, but how do you see being a pastor of a church like ours?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Allison. So a lot of learning. Not that a minister gets a free pass the first year, but there's a lot of learning, a lot of dropping in to normal events and understanding what the King's Cross ordinary is. That's really important. And that's a subtle way of saying, I don't want to show up with a can that says vision on it and I just kind of crack it open and, sprinkle it around. I don't like to start from scratch. I like to build, and part of that is just knowing the church. So dropping in on ministries and getting to know human beings in the church, right? So events, ministries, and the people. I do have to do heavy lifting on the front end. There are a lot of tired people here. I think there are some things that I can do, certainly related to just processes, that can be useful. The way a worship liturgy comes together, I ought to take a lead in that. Not in developing something new, but just how a liturgy comes together. I actually know a thing or two about that. Things that involve processes like caring for staff. A staff knowing what exactly their job is and knowing if their job bumps up into someone else's job. It's kind of operational process kinds of things, but in many ways it's not changing, it's increasing efficiency, and it's also me getting to know just how we get things done. Not just how worship and events take place, but how does stuff get done at King's Cross? That's a challenge for me in this regard. I'm coming from a very large church, a church that kind of has all of these riddles solved. And it's almost like someone kind of needs to just turn the crank and the gear over there spins and stuff just gets done. That's not King's Cross, and that makes me happy. So processes being really clear, even written down. Do we have any ministry teams at King's Cross that don't have a list of objectives? What is the objective of our team? I can help with that. And we can keep all of those together so that all of us know what exactly this ministry team does. Do our individual ministries actually have an objective? You know, why do we do the ministry at the Trails Middle School? What's the school? Trailside, right? So the Backpack Buddies at Trailside. I mean, actually, I don't know, but is there an objective for that ministry that folks in the congregation know as well? The reason that's important is because in year 2, as a church, we need to know how our vision hits the ground. And if we don't know what our objectives are for given ministries, why do we love this ministry? What are we trying to achieve from this ministry? If we don't know just that, which I think is pretty fundamental and basic, how are we going to see how that ministry fits into gather, grow, and glorify? Do we know that? How all of our ministries fit, gather, grow, glorify. That's a year 2 thing, but stuff needs to be done in year 1 so that we as a body can actually answer that question. We do this ministry because it's a part of our gathering ministry value. That's year 2. I don't know. Allison, that sounds like I'm rambling now, but maybe I was rambling 5 minutes ago. That's what I think.
Luke, come on up.
What is your middle name?
Luke, did someone tell you to ask that question, or did it just come to your mind? So my middle name is Francis, but as a kid, I was made fun of for that middle name, and I had to remind everyone that it's the boy Francis, not the girl Francis. So I'm John Francis Jones IV.
Hello. All right. So, a question that was raised by myself and my wife, Molly over there. Through your experience, in terms of reaching out to, you could say, the young adults, I know me and Molly, we know several young adults who grew up in the church, had really bad experiences, whether it's parents or their ministry. Through your experience, how do we, you could say, reach out to those type of folks? And a second question is, what can we do as a church to help support you and your family? My family has been in ministry. Molly's parents have been in ministry as well. In what ways would you like to see our church support you, your wife, and your kids? Because ministry work can be very lonely at times and difficult. So kind of a two-part question.
Yeah. Thanks, Caleb. You know, a lot of ministry to young adults is incidental. I mean, what I mean by that is there's a sense in which but there has to be a kind of atmosphere in which young adults are actually together. Theology may have nothing to do with that togetherness. They're just together. They're socializing, and they're together in such a way that over time there's safety to ask questions and safety to broach difficult subjects. So a real helpfulness in the church is for young adults that are in the church to befriend non-believers. Befriend non-believers. And your elders, and your deacons as well, but especially your elders, need to make sure that when your non-believers come to church events, that they are recognized, that we're reaching out to them, that we're noticing them, but that we're also structuring events in such a way that the cringe factor is super, super low, right? So young adults in the church, you need to befriend non-believers and you need to bring them to events. Here's what I meant by just. The events themselves don't need to be complicated. They might be events in which we're just coming together to go on hikes, or we're coming together to meet at a brewery, or we're bringing young families together. Theology and spiritual stuff is not at the forefront of those. We're building friendships, and what we're longing for is an opportunity for someone who might not be a believer to feel comfortable enough to ask about what it means to be a believer. Now, there are some things, they're not fire starters, but it's like, just a little bit of lighter fluid on events like that. The little bit of lighter fluid might be, let's get together and let's talk about something that may be difficult to talk about. A Christian view of sexuality, for instance, or a Christian view of technology. Now, we're going to think it's a Christian view on whatever, but it might be just, let's get together and talk about whether or not technology is good for our minds or not. And let's get together and let's talk about whether certain sitcoms, television shows, or cultural artifacts of some sort, whether those are good for us as people or not. Or coming together and talking about what do we think about order and structure in our day and our week and our month and our year. Christians have a lot of opinions about that because the Bible addresses each of those. The Bible does address what we do with our time and addresses what we do with our eyes and with our thoughts and where we spend our heart's affections. The Bible actually addresses a lot of that stuff. That's the lighter fluid. So Caleb, wherever you went, incidental events in which comfort level is super, super high and safe. Sunday morning in which that is echoed. And then a landscape where just a little bit of lighter fluid can be applied so that we can have the kinds of discussions that people get to learn about how Christians think. That seems way more tidy than it is. I know that's super, super tidy. It's more complex than that, but you got to answer in some way. How can you help the Joneses? I don't know. Karen always has those answers, but yeah, be our friend. And for me, professionally, I am absolutely okay being told you need to visit that person. That's super helpful. Nudges are really good for me. Not because I have no experience and I have no sense of these things, but the nudges are actually helpful. So if someone I don't know very well calls and says, hey, I have a friend who's going through something and they could use a phone call, that's actually really helpful. I get to know you, but those nudges help me feel like, I don't know, like a pastor. I don't know if you know this, Presbyterians, they kind of like to park in their office surrounded by books and just kind of soak it in. That's a weakness, not a strength. So the nudges of being with people is actually, Caleb, that's actually really, really helpful, especially for our first couple of years here. I don't know, Karen, that sounds like a super pastory answer, but I really think friendship is important. Yeah. That's fine, right? Okay. Karen's nodding yes, by the way, live stream.
I'm going to make it difficult. No.
Hi, Rachel.
What is your philosophy of worship, particularly in terms of music and the liturgy functions of the
Right.
service?
In 30 seconds, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So worship is in the Bible, but worship services aren't. That's problematic because worship services hit us at a very pragmatic level. But corporate worship is actually all over the Bible. Now, they don't maybe look like what we have as a worship service, and they may not necessarily have to, but it's very important that the body come together and worship. We're given general instructions. There should be singing. There should be sharing voices. There should be confessing. There should be reminding of God's goodness. There should be certainly prayer. There should be a fellowship. There should be joining in the sacraments, the Lord's table and baptism. Those are the two sacraments that we believe Jesus taught. So those things need to be happening. Part of the reason I applied, among others, is that King's Cross does weekly communion. That's pretty important to me. But a covenant renewal service should be the kind of service in which we walk in, we're joining our voices, we're flattened by the glory and majesty of God, and we're being told who we are, whether we feel it or not, and then we're being nursed back up to our feet that we might continue in partaking in that joy. We're submitting to, as Jesus said, the teaching of the apostles, right? So we're learning about God's Bible. And we're participating in the sacraments, and we're receiving a word that carries us into the following week, right? Because we worship on the first day. So, beyond that, Rachel, I'm not, so I'm sure, but I don't have the Bible verses to hang those things on. It's not entirely by taste, but we expect a worship service to be a covenant renewal service that checks those boxes that we do find clearly in Scripture. And you know what, Rachel, that's just about corporate worship too, right? So worship isn't just corporate worship. We're actually worshiping in our homes. There's family worship, private worship. But yeah, that's my corporate worship answer.
All right, I want to give you a chance to turn the tables on the congregation. Do you have any questions for these people? All right.
Well, how are they going to answer?
They'll come up to the microphone.
The don't do's for a Sunday morning worship service. I asked the guys this. I want you to feel comfortable to bring non-believers here. What should we not do?
So if anyone has thought, come on up.
I can get us started if that's a little too obtuse.
Pete's got something.
Even as a believer, I found it really uncomfortable for a church to say, all newcomers stand up and introduce yourself.
Yep. Yeah, more stuff like that, please. Yeah, bring it on. Not do more stuff like that, Pete, but comments. "55-minute sermons." And now the church is divided. Glad I could help. That was a test question. I think King's Cross knows the answer to that question already. That's part of the reason I'm attracted to King's Cross. I think you know already. Am I missing someone? Pete, is this a question, or am I asking a question?
Yeah, come on up to the microphone.
These things just. So, if you had all the technical assistance you needed, how would you feel about using social media to do some kind of small evangelistic outreach to the community or beyond?
So I'm more than not opposed to it. I just don't know how to do it. So if there were people who knew how to do that and said something like, so for instance, in my church in Chattanooga, we have during COVID we hired a communication specialist, and this person put all of our writing on a schedule. And I was told that he would tell me when he needed 300 words and by what date, when he needed 600 words and by what date, how many words he needed to describe a given ministry. Those deadlines are like music to me. I just don't know how to do social media. I mean, I'm not ancient. I just don't know how to do it. But for someone to say, would love 3 minutes on why we worship the way we worship, or 3 minutes on why baptism is important, or 30 minutes on, I'm all for it, Pete, I just need to be told what to do.
Maybe will you tell us what you find to be effective evangelism methods just for you personally? What works for you on a pragmatic?
Sorry, she cut in. So, I mean, I think that for Karen and I'm an intensely curious person, and I'm getting better and better. Not like I'm bionic, but I'm getting better and better at driving conversations to spiritual verities, to getting conversations spiritual pretty quick. I love to do quite a few social things, even though I'm introverted. I like coffee and beer and wine, and I travel to go to car events. So I love being around people when there's some kind of focal point, like a car. And I'm really good at going from that focal point to something spiritual pretty quick. My wife is really good at being by my side and not being made to feel awkward by my witticisms or a joke that I'm just trying to lighten a moment while still giving myself permission to talk about something spiritual. And sometimes that's a little bit awkward for Karen, but Karen is fantastic. You're standing in front of my wife, and so I'm now suddenly insecure. So Karen is actually really good at going with the flow. So Karen takes huge initiative in being with people. She just does. And she just expects me to lead us conversationally, and that works very well. I have spiritual conversations with a lot of people. So I have to admit, though, that this is not necessarily easy. It's not the kind of thing that I would say everyone in the church needs to do that. But I will say everyone in the church needs to be around non-believers. And I think I can pull verses that prove that you need to have non-believers as friends, even special friends. I think I can build that argument biblically. That's not the same thing as doing what I actually practice. But at least you're putting yourself in a dangerous position in which a spiritual conversation might happen. I just drive to it pretty quick. Oh, and I'll plug a book real quick. An Englishman by the name of Rico Tice, T-I-C-E. Tiny little book called Honest Evangelism. It's tiny. You can read it quickly. You should have it and just see if that awakens anything inside of you. Rico Tice, Honest Evangelism.
Hey, thanks. Just a couple things. I like your what you just said about driving conversations certain directions. I think that as believers, it can be frightening at times, interacting with topics or the way someone's talking about something, and we do have something out of that conversation, but scary to sometimes drive that way. So anyway, separate from that, some comments all relate to the same thing. You asked about things to not do for unbelievers. I have a comment that's more on the believer side. Having visited a few churches, one thing I've noticed, always been confused by, is the churches will do communion in different ways. Sometimes they'll explain, oh, there we go. Sometimes they'll explain the steps they're taking or what to do when. Other times they don't, and it leaves me sitting there a little bit confused. So something maybe to keep in mind. So now the question then would be, I appreciate the emphasis on catechizing kids and reaching out to unbelievers in the community and that attend the church. What are your thoughts on how, alongside of that, to avoid diluting catechizing believing adults that are in the congregation as well? Because believing adults needing continued growth in the doctrines of the church.
Thanks. That actually is a tricky question for me, because I've never been in a church that didn't have an adult Sunday school curriculum or program, and that's providentially this church has been hindered from that. So I have in the past answered that question in many ways like a Presbyterian in terms of content of material. So so my dream, I would love for us to have a Christian education curriculum for adults in some way, beyond Sunday morning worship. It doesn't have to be, before or after worship service, but something. And that something for adult learners, I think it should repeat often. It ought to spin, so that elders know that if someone has been in our church for 2 years and they've been a part of our adult education ministries, they know they've been exposed to the book of Ephesians. How do they know that? Because we make sure that we do the book of Ephesians every 2 years. The same thing with Old Testament survey and New Testament survey. Here's the problem with that. I actually think that the sense of a graduated adult education plan, I think that is more outside the church than inside the church. I'm not sure you should only take one Old Testament survey class. And in fact, I don't want to feel guilty because we're making you take an Old Testament survey class twice, 2 times in your life. And I wonder if sometimes we're afraid to have an adult ed program that repeats the fundamentals over and over again. I actually find that to be really helpful, and I think that's part of the calling of the church. And in fact, if you look at the first century synagogue school, the synagogue school was primarily for fundamental training, basic stuff. And in fact, it was very common for a first century Jew to look at the synagogue school as mostly for kids. I'm not sure I'd be offended if our adult ed program seemed like it was mostly for kids. Anyone have any idea what the biblical literacy chart looks like? I mean, if you could chart it, isn't it absolutely tanking? I mean, I talk to people for whom I know they have no idea who Noah is, or maybe Noah, Moses and Abraham. No idea. So an adult education program that happens on a regular basis and rotates the fundamentals, I think, is important. Fundamentals in the Bible, fundamentals in church history, and fundamentals in theology. That's hardly a beginning.
You said you had another question for the audience. Go for it.
Yeah, but he threw me off.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have it yet.
You don't have it yet?
No, I might,
All right.
but not yet.
Anyone else? Here comes John Drum.
So, John, I know this is a repeat from earlier conversations, but perhaps you could share some of the thinkers who've most influenced your thinking on Christian life, ministry, or car design.
Wouldn't it be problematic if we only talked about cars and I just sat down? Karen's mom gave me my first book of theology by A.W. Tozer called Knowledge of the Holy. And she gave me my first book on culture by Francis Schaeffer, How Should We Then Live? And not so much Tozer, Schaeffer has been hugely influential for me. Later in life, he was very, very political, but I started college as an art major, and I really like philosophy. And when I was converted, it turns out I can read. I mean, I didn't read books in high school. I mean, it's just ridiculous to sit and read. But when I was converted, I really like reading, and apparently I'm pretty good at it. And I became, Karen and I were married before I finished college, and apparently I could actually get a literature degree. I just didn't start reading until I was 20. But Francis Schaeffer, he brought this wonderful world of philosophy and art together with the Bible and theology. I owe that man an awful lot. But the figures today, I really love J.I. Packer. I really like D.A. Carson. And I really, really love Sinclair Ferguson. I don't know if any of these names mean anything to anyone. C.S. Lewis is very, very important to me. I cited a guy named Christopher Watkin. Maybe one of the best books. Well, doesn't matter. Absolutely wonderful book, Biblical Critical Theory. That he is the new Francis Schaeffer, Christopher Watkin. That book is so phenomenal. I don't know what else. John, I got excited. I just lost track. So.
What are some jobs you've had outside the church, and how have they impacted the way you do ministry?
Yeah, so jobs outside of the church. My wife is already smiling at me. I may be a good source of information for men's denim. Just saying that. So JCPenney retail, I've done a lot of retail. So young men's department, folding. I was the Levi product specialist. So actually that was a really good job. I have fond memories of that job. I have been pizza delivery driver. That works for me. Like driving. Gymnastics coach when I was young and unfit. I don't know. Oh, yes. My real job before being a pastor, I was in publishing. I was an editorial assistant for a publishing company in Wheaton. And I delivered pizzas. So. I don't have my question. It's just absolutely
Spanish,
gone.
that's fine. Go for it.
This may have already been asked while I was having an in-depth discussion about elephant airports with my son, but I was wondering what your thoughts were on like a physical building for this church. Like,
Yeah.
we had reasons for not pushing for that, so I was wondering what your thoughts were on whether we stayed renting or not, things like that.
Right. Yeah. So first of all, that's not a decision for me, right? Obviously, that's a decision for us. I know of churches that are very, very content not owning a building. They do tend to be urban churches for which it would just be almost an injudicious use of finances to buy a building. So a church that I really like is a church in Santa Monica, California. Karen and I have family there. We visit often. Pacific Crossroads Church, they don't believe they'll ever own a building, and they're fine with that. They just go into larger and larger spaces. So I don't feel like owning a building is like, ought to be a locked-on target for a church. I'm not convinced of that. But again, it's not really my decision. So. Okay, so I have a question. Can I, by show of hands, how many people listen to primarily Christian music at home? Okay, that helps. Thanks.
What are your thoughts on maintaining unity in the body of Christ amongst like political diversity, cultural diversity, that kind of situation?
Romans 14 is awesome. Is that sufficient? So during COVID, I think that all pastors learned a lot during COVID. That's not a snarky comment. A lot of good things. We're actually applying Romans 14. And the truth of the matter is this. Are you ready? You may be sitting next to someone right now that if you knew their certain opinion on a certain subject, you might be really offended. So, silly example. You might be sitting next to someone who watches horror movies. Or you might be sitting next to someone who listens to headbanger music. All right, so those are silly, silly examples, I know. But the truth of the matter is, we each of us are a bundle of opportunities to offend someone. We really and truly are. That's not for non-believers. They're the offensive ones. That's inside the church. And I wonder if what happens is we don't traffic enough in the reality of Romans 14, that we really need to be vigilant about that and slow to speak. When we discover that something is going on in someone's life, maybe we don't need to speak immediately. If you discover that someone has a tattoo and you had no idea, you thought that they were pure. It may be that here's your response. Maybe your response ought to be to acknowledge that yes, that and tons of other things. Otherwise, the Holy Spirit would not have given us Romans 14 or 1 Corinthians 8 that teach us how to navigate fellowship in those kinds of situations. So that might be job one. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for Romans 14. And job two might be to just be slow to speak. You may not actually have to bring it up. So err on the side of the liberty of not having to speak about it. And then number three, be okay being offended. I don't have the reference. The chapter on law, 1 Corinthians 6. It's all about, it's believers taking each other to court. And Paul says something like, why not be willing to be judged? Do you guys remember that? 1 Corinthians 6, Sunday afternoon. Why not be willing to just be judged? Maybe that's the third thing. Maybe just you're slow to speak, you're praising God for Romans 14, and you're just willing to be, okay, so maybe I am hurting their sanctification by not bringing up the fact that they have a skull tattoo or something. Does that make sense? So that's a little bit of a cop-out, just a little. But it should be an encouragement to all of us that we can do it because you're doing it right now. You just don't know enough of the vile habits of the people sitting next to you. So we can do it. We can endure COVID and still be a loving, harmonious church. Right? Amen? Yes?
All right, we got about 10 minutes left, so final questions. Bring them on up.
I just want to ask, what's your eschatological perspective, and how do you see that playing into the life of the church and how the church interacts with the world?
Yes, eschatological perspective. So perspective on the last things in the Bible. So not just Revelation, but Matthew 24 and 25 as well, like when Jesus comes. So my perspective is called amillennial. So awe is a Greek negative. So I don't believe that we are to anticipate 1,000-year reign of Jesus. In our denomination, that's an allowable view, but I say that because there are other views that I don't like that are also allowable. Like, I don't believe that culture is going to get better and better and better, and then Jesus will come and there will be a 1,000-year reign on earth. That's not me, but I have friends that believe that. My view as an amillennialist, I don't believe that we need to worry about the 1,000 years because the 1,000 years is it's figurative terminology for where we are right now. Christ is reigning now. And we're not hoping that Christ is reigning because the wrong political party is in charge, and when the right political party is in charge, then we'll really know that Christ is reigning. Or if more and more people are faithful in their marriages, we'll know that Christ is reigning. It doesn't matter how black or gray or horrible things are. Christ is reigning right now. Mustard seeds are mustard seeds, right? But the amillennial view clings to that, almost against reason, that we can say to someone who just learned that their child has leukemia, we can say, Christ is in charge. Not only do I not know why he allowed this to happen, I'm a little perturbed that he allowed this to happen. Why do you think Psalm 88 is in the Bible? It's okay to be angry at God. Even in our ignorance, we're ignorant most of the time. His kingdom has come. And our cheer, smile, I really mean that, our cheer, our joy, our delight can happen when the wrong political party is in charge, can happen during World War III, can happen when another nation is coming in to take ours. It should happen. Christ reigns. We smile, we're joyful. We can actually be happy even before we're executed. We can be gentle when we're being marginalized and pressured. We can be cheerful even when we lose our job, and we never have to be a punk rocker. We don't have to take down the man. Jesus is reigning right now. Veered a little bit to a sermon there. So sorry, but that's Amil. You can look it up.
Anyone else? Jen, you look like you have a question.
So not everyone here may know of your disdain for board games. Can you elaborate on where that root or where the root of that comes from?
Jen, it's a public forum. What did you miss? I don't like board games. I really don't like board games. I don't like board games for reasons similar to why Karen and I, well, I don't like to run really anyway, but why Karen and I don't run together. My wife is an avid runner. Just people get different during board games. And I get different during board games. And I don't have the spirit for it. I mean, and by the way, some people are competitive and some are, I guess everyone is competitive because everyone's selfish. But that transition doesn't happen for me. I'm not super, it's okay. You can be competitive and godly, absolutely. In fact, you can be competitive and cutthroat. And for some games, that's what it takes to win. It's disrupting of my spirit. I feel like I lose a love for poetry if I play a 3-hour Monopoly game. So I lose something somehow. Anyway, I loathe board games. So. I can tell you thought that was important, Jen.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Final question time.
Speed round.
All right. Do you have any final remarks or questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. To be a pastoral candidate is a great, great honor. So, thank you, Pastoral Search Committee. Thank you very much. I've appreciated our conversations. I feel like I have been treated very, very well. So your search committee has actually done a great job. Yeah, I was going to preface that with something witty. The Pastoral Search Committee has actually ministered to me. So thank you. You should be praying for Karen and I. Whatever you're thinking about what it might be like for a family to move to Ashburn, we're thinking all of those things. So if you could just be in prayer for Karen and I, be in prayer for our kids. So if you would be in prayer for Karen and yeah, so be in prayer for Karen and I as we think about moving when Linnea's not done with school and Eric's not done with school. So there you go. So thank you.
John Drum, will you come close us in prayer?
Our Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for this chance today to get to know the Jones better, and for the candid and cordial discussion we've had today. We look forward to your leading and confirmation of this relationship, and thank you again for your great goodness to us. Amen.
All right, thanks, y'all. If you think of anything later this week that you would like to ask, then please feel free to email your search committee, and we will figure out how to get the answers you need. Next week, we'll have a meeting after church to vote, and we just want you to feel like well-informed. So anything that comes to mind, feel free to bring it up. Other than that, I think we're good to go. So thanks for joining us. We're going to try to tidy up and be out of here by 2:30 for Francisco's sake. So if you would help get your stuff tidied up and get out of here, that's it. That's all we got.